Hello, everyone, and welcome to another UCalgary webinar. I'm Chancellor Deborah Yedlin, and I'll be host for this afternoon's discussion. And this is the last webinar that I will be hosting as Chancellor, as my term is coming to a close at the end of June. If you've participated in one of our previous webinars, welcome back. And if this is the first time you're joining us, thank you for being here. Now, it's been 2 years, more than 2 years, since we started holding these webinars. And we've gone from concentrating on COVID and its impact to addressing a wider array of issues that are of interest to the community, from energy and the environment to economics, sport, mental health, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have invited experts from UCalgary and the broader community to share their thoughts on these and many, many other issues. And today will be no different. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Something that made us very proud at UCalgary recently is I'd like to share with you today. For the first time, we were named one of Canada's top 5 research universities. We are the youngest institution to ever receive this honor, and that speaks to the caliber of our scholarship. And it's one that will continue to enrich the student experience because it isn't about research or teaching, it's about research and teaching, which is why we're also in the top 5 for teaching and learning. We're also exceeding the expectations in terms of the number of startups that happen out of UCalgary, beating both the University of Waterloo and the University of Toronto in terms of the number of startups coming out of this university. Now, a big reason why our students have such positive experiences is our entrepreneurial thinking, which reflects Canada's most enterprising cities, one of Canada's most enterprising cities. We encourage new ways to learn, mixing disciplines together to start something new, looking to the future and meeting its needs while responding to what local businesses need today. We encourage our students to question something, discover something, destruct something, create something, cure something, undo something, solve something, and we encourage them to do it all on our campus so that we can continue to grow and improve together as a great research university gets even greater. Today, I'm joined by someone who's done a few somethings since graduating from UCalgary, and together we'll discuss new beginnings and our hopes for the future of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you our distinguished guest. Former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi is a passionate Calgarian, an accomplished business professional, and a community leader with a solid track record of getting things done. He's run a large nonprofit. He's been a trusted advisor to corporate leaders in Canada and the United States, and he literally wrote the book on Canadian cities. Nenshi spent many years at the international business consulting firm McKinsey & Company, where he advised large telecommunications, banking, retail, and oil and gas company in corporate strategy. And after leaving McKinsey, he started his own business, the Ascend Group, a consultancy that helps public, private, and not-for-profit organizations to grow. In this role, he designed major policy for the Alberta government, helped create a Canadian strategy for the Gap, Banana Republic, and Old Navy, and worked with the United Nations to determine how global businesses can help the poorest people on the planet. His real passion, though, is making cities, especially Calgary, work better. He's the leader author of Building Up, Making Canada's Cities Engines of Growth and Magnets of Development, and has been long putting his ideas to work in Calgary, most notably as Calgary's 36th mayor, a position he held from 2010 to 2021. Nenshi's been the chairman of the Epcor Centre for the Performing Arts, now known as Arts Commons, and has lent his expertise to not-for-profits across the city, including the Calgary Foundation, the United Way, the Coral Springs Community Association, and Brown Bagging for Calgary's Kids. He grew up in Calgary and lived and worked in cities around the world before coming back here to make his home in Calgary. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Calgary, where he was president of the Students' Union, and a Master of Public Policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where he studied as a Kennedy Fellow. Nenshi also served on the leadership team of Imagine Calgary, where he was the primary author of Calgary's 100-year vision. Welcome, Naheed, and thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Chancellor. That was a very long introduction. Nowadays, I just say, here's Naheed. But congratulations on your term. I'm so honored to be your very last webinar.
Yeah.
You've had a magnificent term. I can't believe that all these years have gone by so quickly, but I guess COVID has messed up every single one of us's sense of timing. So when are you officially done?
June 30th.
Wow.
June 30th. Yeah. It seems like it's gone by in a flash, just like I'm sure your mayor's terms went by in a flash.
It did. You know, it's like people say to folks with new kids, the days are long, but the years are short.
Yes, that's so true. It's absolutely true. So tell me, I think we can have a conversation. You can ask me questions. I can ask you questions, but I'm going to start with the fact that it's been 6 months and you've been very much removed from the day-to-day issues facing the city. You haven't been, the structure you've made is your own. You have chosen to be quiet on Twitter. I'm just curious as to ish, but not, ish. How has it been? What does it feel like?
I mean, it's very interesting. I'm kind of shocked that you just said it's been 6 months, but I think it's been 6 months.
It has. I did the math this morning.
I think the election was 6 months yesterday. So, and I served for one more week after the election. So yeah, 6 months. Whoa, geez, I haven't done a thing. I got to get to work. I got a giant to-do list around the house, things I've been neglecting for 11 years. My house was badly damaged in the hailstorm in 2020. It's still not fixed. So I got stuff to do. And clearly I've done nothing. I am enjoying, however, sleeping on average 12 to 14 hours a day. I got a lot to catch up on. But I'm very, very, very lucky. I was just at the grocery store and a woman was asking me, another patron was asking me, how are you feeling? Do you miss it? And I said, on the one hand, there is a lot going on. And I feel like there are areas in which I might be helpful. But on the other hand, there is a lot going on. And it might be good to have someone else, fresh legs and fresh energy, working on these things. I mean, the good news is I think Calgary City Council, the new City Council, is doing a fine job. Certainly makes my life easier. If they were doing a terrible job, I'd be much grumpier. And one of these days I'm going to have to find one of those, what do you call them, jobs. But in the meantime, I'm writing, I'm doing a little bit of speaking, talking to folks about my thoughts about the world and small issues like that. And so far, so good. As I say, I'm going to have to find something remunerative at some point, but for now, I'm really enjoying the ability to step back. An old leadership professor of mine used to say, you got to get off the dance floor and get on the balcony and watch the dancers from time to time. That's right. And so I'm enjoying stepping back and watching the dancers. I'm still pretty darn critical of a lot of stuff that's going on, particularly with our provincial government. And I'm not going to be quiet about it, but it is an opportunity to try and impact the world in a different way than being in elected office. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I only brought one thing home with me. I brought 51 boxes.
I was going to say, you probably brought a bunch of boxes with you, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, 51 boxes in my basement that have not yet been unpacked, and about 200 beautiful pieces of art that have not yet been put up on any walls. I don't have room for 200 pieces of house in my little house, but 200 pieces of art in my little house. But the one emotional thing I brought home, which is also a physical thing, is a project that I've been working on really for 11 years since I became mayor. And it's called 3 Things for Canada. Mm-hmm. And I really did bring it home because there's a giant foam number 3 that also lives in my basement. And so I'll be relaunching that at some point. And it's a very simple program that reminds people that the power to change our community lies in our own hands. And so that's what I did as an academic. I worked a lot on issues of civic engagement, figuring out how people could get more involved in their community. For those that don't know, before I was the mayor, I was professor of nonprofit management at the Bissett School of Business at Mount Royal University, the other university on Crowchild Trail. And so my field really had to do with how and why people get involved in their communities. And what we learned, which is very clear in the literature, is the reason people don't volunteer is not nobody asked me or I don't have it. Excuse me, it is nobody asked me. It's not I don't have time or I don't have money or I don't have a passion. It's nobody asked me. And so 3 Things for Canada is just a simple program to ask people. And it encourages every citizen every year to do at least 3 acts of community service. And if you've heard me speak at all over the last 11 or 12 years, you probably know one Sanskrit word, and that word is seva. Seva means selfless service. And so I think in these difficult and divided and angry times, the solution is found in people's own service, in their own seva. And so that is going to be part of what I do going forward. And I myself am trying to figure out how to do seva in a way differently than being in elected office.
So let's just pick up on that, because that was actually one of the questions I had for you. Like, community has been so important to you, and I have heard you talk about those 3 things that we should all be mindful of. How do we build community through generational and ideological divides, such as what we're facing now? Because people maybe want to do community service, but in their own service, as opposed to really recognizing that it's for the benefit of everybody.
I'm not convinced it's true. I have to remain optimistic.
Okay.
It's the only way to live, I think.
That's true.
But we've all seen the meme that says what they want you to believe, and it shows society divided in the middle, and what society actually is, and it shows society divided with a little piece at the end, cut off. And I kind of feel that is true. I kind of feel that, when we look in Alberta, where we have 95% immunization rates, sure, people got immunized to protect themselves, but they also got vaccinated to protect their community. And I think that says a lot to me about what real people think about community. I think it is true that our leaders of all stripes have lost their way, that they have been compounding this kind of divisiveness. And I think it's also true that social media and discourse and the way we talk to one another has really shifted how we do this. I was just in the middle of an article, which I haven't finished yet, so I can't recommend it, but it's an article in the Atlantic that uses the analogy of the Tower of Babel.
I just was going to talk to you about that. I just read it. It's a fabulous article.
Okay, tell me how it finishes, because I literally was reading it when we logged on today.
So you know what? I actually read it, and I have not quite finished it either, but I was going to ask you if you'd seen it.
So, but the preface, the thesis, I love that we're just being total students here. I did part of the reading, and I'm going to fake my way through the rest. But for those who have no idea what we're talking about, the thesis of this article, it uses the analogy of the Tower of Babel, which is the people built a tower very tall, and it made God angry. Like, who do they think they are? And so it's not clear in the Old Testament whether he destroyed the tower, but what he did do is he made it impossible for the people to talk to one another. He changed the languages. And so the argument that this article, and I can't even remember the author's name, hopefully someone will look it up and put it in the chat, was making was that social media has done that to us. We no longer speak the same language. This is true. And another thing that I'm deeply concerned about is radicalization. So, through my time as mayor, I was often asked to speak about, hey, thank you, Gail. I was often asked to speak about radicalization of young Muslim men, for example, and what kind of programs we can do to de-radicalize them. What we never talk about, and what I fear we're not brave enough to talk about in our society, is the radicalization of white people. Now, even if I said that in public, I'd get in a lot of trouble. But something is going on, and we have to get to the root of it, So I keep a broad set of Facebook friends. My rule on Facebook is I have to actually know you to be my Facebook friend, but I don't try not to ban people or anything like that. And so I've got some folks on there who are friends or people I know who have moved to kind of the anti-mandate, anti-vaccination side of things. And it's fascinating because many of them did not come from kind of what you might describe as the alt-right. Their skepticism about vaccines comes from the other side. They're kind of natural health and crystals and yoga and healing and things.
Yeah.
And now they are sharing Maxime Bernier stuff, People's Party of Canada stuff. And they have been, frankly, fully radicalized. And, I don't want to sound too tinfoil hat about it, but a lot of this is by design. A lot of us have forgotten the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which really was about using very sophisticated artificial intelligence to identify people who were susceptible to these kinds of messages, to put them into social groups so they felt like people agreed with them, and then to seed these social groups with increasingly radical messages, as well as voting messages to try and change who was getting elected. This happened, and it continues to happen by design. It's not accidental. And so I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, how far are we willing to go? I don't even know what that means. That sounds like such a shocking thing to say, but I don't even know what it means. But how far are we willing to go in order to preserve or build the kind of society that we want or need for us to be able to progress? And so I don't know the answer, but coming back to your question, I think the answer is in service. When people sit down together, when they see one another, when they work in a way that helps other people, it tends to break down these sometimes artificial, sometimes real barriers that are dividing us. And I know that sounds really naive, but I think it has to be true. Society doesn't work if it's not true.
But don't you need someone that people can believe in to rally around, who sort of can show a path that goes across both sides of the potential division to bring people together? Isn't that something that we need to see in order to? It sounds like a simple
question, but I think it's really deep. So part of it is, do we need someone to lead us, or do we know how to lead ourselves?
Well, when you talk about, so that's part of it. When you look at what's happened with the Freedom Convoy, for example, how does that fit into your thinking in terms of leadership versus leading ourselves?
I was listening to the radio the night that the police moved in on the convoy, and there were reporters there who were interviewing people on the scene.
Yeah.
And what really surprised me about the conversation was how these folks who were in the protest were genuinely surprised that the police's job wasn't simply to protect them. They were genuinely surprised that everyone didn't agree with them, because they had been led to believe that they were representing everybody except the corrupt reptilian people in power. And they were genuinely surprised. And so I might answer the opposite of your question, which is, can leaders wreck it? And demagogues ruin the kind of political consensus or societal consensus that we have? And absolutely they can.
Yeah.
And you've seen that all over the place. I don't need to give you any names, but when you look at the recent elections in Hungary, Prime Minister Orban was the first of these, I think it's fair to say. And he just won a giant resounding victory, even in a moment where they're accepting a whole bunch of refugees, something he said he would never do. Because those refugees, well, let's not get into that. Look different than previous refugees. But in any case, so I think it can be wrecked. I think that there are folks who can help lead us out, but ultimately I think it has to be something that bubbles up. It's not going to be one great leader, saying the right words. And if there is one great leader saying the right words, maybe it's not a political leader. Maybe it's Oprah. Maybe it's Brené Brown, people who are really reminding us of the real humanity of that we should be inhabiting. But I really fear that our government political system has lost that. The other thing I want to highlight is, you said, bridging the divide and bringing both sides together, which I think is important. But I also think it's important to recognize there's not two sides. There's many, 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 many different people. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that, kind of what they call on the internet, whataboutism, of actually treating everyone's point of view as though it's equally valid, is the way out of here either. And so I guess I'm happy to be out of politics, because these are challenging things. But some may have seen me as a divisive figure when I was a politician, but I certainly tried as best I could to bring people together as best I could, but at the same time, call out people who were being unreasonable with their neighbors. And that's a very fine line. I'm not sure I always got it right. In fact, I'm sure I didn't always get it right. But I think those are the sorts of things we need to think through.
So there's a question from Jeffrey Priest, and he says, in what would call an enlightened era, is it that people have forgotten the pain of previous divisions and therefore don't consider the consequences of not listening to others' opinions? We know we've had divisions in Canada through the years, but we've also had a respect between people when they have disagreed, and that seems to have disappeared.
What do you think? This is supposed to be a conversation between us.
So, we've forgotten the ability to intellectualize an argument and to respectfully listen to the other side, because we've closed our minds because we just don't want to entertain someone's perspective that may be so contrary to ours. And the solution, instead of saying, well, what do you mean by that? And let's discuss it. It's, well, I don't want to hear that. And then off you go. And then you have this, this propensity to perpetuate division as opposed to anything that could be seen as consensus or understanding. What do you think?
I agree with everything you said, and that's a beautiful question, Jeffrey, but let me just play devil's advocate with you. I am an old professor after all.
Yeah.
Was it easier in the past because the people with whom we disagreed tended to look like us, tended to be not that different from us? So it was easier to understand them. But in a world where people of color are now saying, that deal that we have with society, which is we'll put up with these little acts of racism in return for getting to live here. And young people are telling us, that deal doesn't work for me. I don't want to have to be followed by the security guard at the Walmart.
No.
And, the best example of this, probably just because it's the starkest example, is, LGBTQ rights were hard until they were easy. Excuse me. LGBTQ rights were hard until they were easy. And now we find ourselves dealing with human rights for trans people.
Mm-hmm.
And this is harder for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Everybody knows somebody gay. Everyone has someone in their family who's gay. They may not know someone who's trans. And they may find this to be a much, much more difficult conversation, one that makes us much more nervous because we don't have the language to deal with it. And then you end up with a huge backlash against LGBTQ rights. And, so I wonder if it's not just that we've forgotten the skills to listen to one another, but also that we are faced with harder questions that are taking us to the limits of our tolerance.
Or we haven't figured out how to ask those difficult questions, or we've forgotten how to make a safe space for people. Because so many people are afraid of not even saying anything because they don't want to offend someone. That's another part of it. And in the end, they say nothing, which is also harmful.
Yeah, and the increased rigidity of positions does make it more difficult to have this conversation. You use the word safe space, and a lot of people on the right would say, well, that's for wimps, right? At the same time, calling for their own safe spaces, mm-hmm. where there are not trans rights, where people know their place. And the important thing to remember about the concept of safety is it's safety for everyone. And so it's safety for me to be able to ask my trans colleague, I'll get your pronouns right. That's not hard. But tell me what else I can do so that you feel truly a part of this community and this society. And you're right. I think a lot of folks don't feel safe even to do that. No,
that fear is still, I think, very much a part of how people sort of approach something that's different. And the option is to not say anything. But, when you talk about rights and you talk about inclusion, the Constitution turned 40 this week.
Just this weekend.
Yeah. And, there were some negative pieces in the paper on the weekend about why it wasn't necessarily the best thing for Canada. I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are, and from your perspective, what good it's done for Canada.
Well, it changed, and I was only 10, when it started. You weren't even born yet, but
well, might have been a little older.
But so I can't claim to be a thoughtful political thinker in 1982, but it was a profound shift. And Senator Paul Simons just did a lecture at the University of Alberta, the Leach Memorial Lecture. You can find it on her podcast.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. Like, it would have been an interesting beginning to an academic discussion because she staked a point. And she really much staked the point on the living tree concept of constitutionalism in Canada, which is that it always changes.
Correct.
And without that, we wouldn't have solid LGBTQ rights that can't be taken away, equality in marriage, and so on, for example. And I'm a fan of that, but I do get nervous about it because I don't know what the consensus is in Canada that has kept the judiciary relatively non-political. So, when I saw President Biden embracing Justice Jackson on the grounds of the White House, I thought to myself, that would be unthinkable in Canada for the Prime Minister to do that, even if he nominated the person. And I wouldn't want to live in a society where that happened, because that's the danger of the Charter. Now, I will say very technically, because I'm a political science geek, I've never liked the notwithstanding clause. I think it is horrifically dangerous. And I think it is only the fact that we have a certain political politeness in Canada that has kept it from being abused until recently, when, of course, in Quebec, it is being brutally abused in what used to be called Bill 21. And so that, to me, is a big challenge. I don't know that we could ever fix it. But, I salute the bravery of the people who came forward with it. It's impossible to even think about a small amendment to the Constitution now that affects more than one province. And the fact that they wrote an entirely new one is pretty amazing work, pretty, legacy building, lifetime building work. And so for that, I think I'm pretty grateful.
Now, had Quebec signed on to the Constitution, do you think we would have be dealing with Bill 21?
Well, the signing of it is a symbolic thing. A lot of people don't understand that. Whether or not they signed on to it, it still applies to them. And the notwithstanding clause was bribery to get them to sign it, right?
And they didn't. Yeah.
And they didn't anyway, and they wouldn't have. That was a bit naive, I think, of the drafters to think of that. But I think the fact that we have not sort of deified the people who wrote it as they have in the United States. But we look at the document and not the absolute infallibility of the people who wrote it, I think is very important. But we have all the tools in place in Canada to be able to mess it up. And frankly, that's what concerns me more than anything else. You look in the United States and, one justice in Florida who had a very controversial appointment. Many people said she wasn't qualified, but she was appointed at the very, very end of the previous president's reign, has just overturned the federal mask mandate against the advice of the Centers for Disease Control, meaning that, frankly, many people are going to die who wouldn't otherwise have died. And, those are choices we make in society. Right? When we lift restrictions, we know people are going to die, but we say the costs outweigh the benefits, or the benefits outweigh the costs. And in this particular case, the politicization, because people in the US go judge shopping, right? They look for the circuit where they think they can actually have their case heard sympathetically based on who's on the bench. And I think that's a danger. And we don't see that in Canada, but, appointment of judges has always been political in Canada too. We just don't talk about it the same way. And we tend to appoint really, really qualified people who set their politics aside. But, that is probably my biggest concern about what may happen. But that's a long game concern. That's something for people who are starting to put things in place now in order to have change happen 10, 20, 30 years from now.
And it's up to the people that are starting to put things in place now who are studying now. So if you had to wind back the clock and you started your undergrad all over again, what would you have done differently, if anything?
Well, that's a good question. That was a really long time ago, I actually I didn't start out as a business student. In those days, you did 2 years in what was then the Faculty of General Studies before you went into the business school. And so I took very wide-ranging courses at the beginning of my term and ended up getting talked into the business school. And I'm actually really happy I did it that way. I took a lot of stuff outside, a lot of stuff to get quote unquote educated. And the stuff in the business school was helped me get quote unquote trained.
Yep.
And I thought it was a very, very good balance of what I managed to do. I was involved in everything. We were poor, so I never had fewer than 4 to 5 part-time jobs going on at the same time. I was on campus. I took the bus every morning, and I took the last bus home usually after 11 o'clock every night. And I really enjoyed that whole perspective. But I will tell you, well, you know this because she's a Chancellors Club scholar, but I've got a niece who is starting in her second year at UCalgary, and she's just registering for her classes. And so she was like, what shall I take? And I said, well, there is one thing I insist you do. You have no option but to do it, which is Ron Glassberg is still teaching the course that made a huge difference in my life.
Yeah.
And I know it doesn't fit in your schedule and you'll probably have to take a summer class to fill in. You're taking that class.
And what's the class?
I don't know how much longer he's going to be teaching it. So
what is it?
Well, I forget what it's called now. It used to be called General Studies 300. Now it's Communications Media, something. But the whole point of it is it's the class that in old days used to be called Western Civilization. So you read Plato and Socrates and Dante. And to me, that is the thing that helped me feel like I was somewhat of an educated person.
Yeah.
More so than the finance courses, which were actually more useful to me in the future.
Yeah, that's how I felt about my economics classes. The English was a way to think and analyze, and then the economics was more applied in terms of where I was looking going forward. So there's a couple of questions that have come in, and it's one of them is, if you could change one thing during your terms, what would it be? So they want you to answer. No, you go first. I'm not quite done yet. So you go first and I'll go after you.
I'll just be very, we've been having a very big picture conversation. I'll be much more small picture. I should have managed the Olympics file very differently. We should have gotten those Olympics for 2026. And a number of things caused me to mishandle that file. The first is I trusted the provincial and federal governments to live up to their commitments. I should not have done that. And when I saw the first cracks appearing in their commitments, I should have walked away and said, we're not going through this unless you guys are signing on the dotted line.
Right.
Second is I had a brand new city council, and it was a very weird city council. And I was probably a little bit too deferential. I've always been deferential to my council because I figured they're elected as well as I am. But I was too deferential. They were new, they didn't know what they were doing. And I didn't kind of put my foot down and say, the work's already been done. We're not re-questioning every single thing.
Yeah.
We're not opening it up again. We're just moving forward, because allowing them to wallow in their questions for so long, questions that had long been answered and they were never going to change their minds, but allowing them to wallow in it for so long led to doubt in the minds of the citizens, which really played out badly when we ended up having to have a plebiscite, which nobody wanted, and which the federal and provincial governments only secured their commitment, their monetary commitment, after the advanced polls had already opened. So it was completely bungled from the start to the finish, I would say.
And as a former Winsport board member, we were very disappointed. But there's nothing, you have to look forward and you can't look back. And as I look at my term, I look at the things that I was able to accomplish during the first 18 months. And that was really connecting the community with the university, which was my goal all along. Just as I translated business to the language of everybody reading newspapers and listening on the radio, I wanted to do the same thing for the academics world and really bring the university closer to the city. And, COVID had its plans. And so that's that. There's nothing I can do about that. We did things like this, inviting people to talk and highlight issues that were really important, and using the virtual platforms as much as we could for outreach. So I think, for me, it was gratifying to be able to be within the university framework and in that university community. And that my biggest regret is that the things that I would have liked to do, and which including spend more time with our chancellor scholars and other faculty members and students on campus, was not possible. So
yeah, I feel, when I think back to my 5 years on campus for studying and one as the president of the Students' Union, I wouldn't give back a second of it. And I really do feel for the students who had to navigate a very different kind of world.
Yeah.
My niece is an example. I shouldn't point her out because she's an active student. She actually happens to be a very good online learner. She has that kind of discipline and those skills.
Yeah.
And so academically, she did really well. In fact, I kept saying to her, oh, you're not supposed to do as well as you're doing in your first year. You're supposed to get swatted around a little bit and realize you're not the smartest person in the room and you've got to develop good skills, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Been there.
And I don't want that to happen to you when you're, 30 in your second job, right? Because it'll happen eventually.
Yeah,
but she happens to have done very well academically. She succeeded academically very, very well. But she's missed out on so much of the experience. Oh, yeah. And I don't want to be like ridiculously nostalgic about it because the world has changed. But, when you're not meeting people who are different to you, who have different ideas, who come from different backgrounds, you're missing out on part of that experience. So I am hopeful that as we get into a new phase of this pandemic, people will start to get a lot of that back as well.
Yeah, I think there's some anxiety in terms of what that looks like and how do we really reclaim that life and really connect with one another. And that's a navigation that's going to go on for the next while.
Keep wearing masks. That's what I say. I found masks that are super comfortable. These from Costco. I can wear them all day and it's not any drama to me to wear it. But it's a little symbol for me that I'm trying to keep other people safe.
Yeah, and I think, the reality is we have to accept everybody for their choices. And that sometimes in our polarized world, you hear of people being challenged because they're still wearing a mask, and it's my choice, my body, my community, that this is not your purview to challenge me. There's a great question that's come in from Aretha Van Herk, and it says, one element that she worries contributes to division is the ever-present competition strategy. Vote for the best community in Calgary, argue for the best book to read this year. Now there's also a best Canadian song, as if there's only one possible outcome. So everything's turned into there's an athletic quality. Someone has to win and someone has to lose. How can we emphasize communication and collaborative approaches instead? It's a great question.
Well, I think the best book of local history is Aretha Van Herk's Mavericks that everyone should read. I think it is better than the Grant McEwen books that I have in my library. I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding about that. It is an excellent book. I'm just teasing you, Aretha. But that's a really important question because I happen to believe, I'm a free enterprise guy. I'm a business professor after all. I happen to believe in the market. I believe in competition. I believe in the competitive edge. I believe that it makes you better when there is something to strive towards. But I also, and by the way, this year, because I retired, I was able to listen to all of Canada Reads, and it was actually really interesting. Yeah. But I really hear what you're saying around the need for us to build up the values of collaboration, of community. That's not a left-wing thing to say. No. Remember that we live in an area, Aretha will know this better than anybody, where you didn't get a barn built unless all your neighbors came and helped you build the barn. Yeah. And so in some way, we have to be able to reestablish our sense of connection to one another. When I was a volunteer for Imagine Calgary, back in 2005, writing the 100-year vision for Calgary, it's all about the word connected. We're connected to each other. We're connected to our spaces. We're connected to our places. We're connected beyond our borders. And recently, the last major thing I did as mayor was we passed Canada's first community-based action plan on mental health and addiction. And it's called a community of connection. Because we identified that the root cause of a lot of people's challenges with mental illness is a lack of connection. And so we have to think about how we live that in our lives every day, whether it's chatting with the person at the grocery store or on the bus, or if it's actually actively working in areas at the neighborhood level, like community gardens and little free libraries, or at the much broader societal level in thinking about how to bring people together. And you know what? Paradoxically, sometimes competition is a way to do that. So, Councillor Courtney Penner, who is a new member of City Council, one of her fun projects she's doing right now is a competition for Calgary's official bird. And when I first
have
heard
you
about
voted?
this, I thought to myself, don't you have other things to do? And then I realized what she was doing was not just birds are cool, I guess they are, but it was actually using the competition as a way to bring people together in a risk-free environment to talk about something fun and interesting, but also to build up a sense of community. Even if you believe in the magpie and I believe in the blue jay, it doesn't matter. The idea is that we can be able to enjoy our own company even when we disagree. And maybe she didn't think about it quite that deeply. I bet she did, because she's a pretty deep thinker. But to me, that is an example of how you can use the competitive spirit to actually build up community.
And identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So did you vote?
No, because I don't like birds.
Bird watching's become a really big thing during the pandemic.
Know.
Yeah.
I know. I just don't like those magpies. They're really pretty, but
well, there's flickers, there's blue jays, there's the chickadees, robins. You don't
the
have
chickadees.
To
I like the chickadees. They eat out of your hand.
Yeah, they're lovely. They're the first ones that wake you up in the mornings.
Yeah. Like Premier Kenny, here's one of the things I have in common with our Premier. I am a very avid indoorsman.
Well, being outdoors has been very important to people's mental health. That's the true. Strategy, yeah, that's been absolutely critical. So question from somebody else at the university: who was your favorite professor while a student? I'm assuming it was Professor Glasberg. What was your favorite place to study? Favorite place to eat? And what's your favorite spot on campus?
Oh boy, okay, here we go. I had a lot of favorite professors. Glassberg is awesome. I would get in big trouble if I didn't say Dr. Bob, who's been my mentor,
of course, yeah,
for the
Bob
last
Schultz.
35 years of my life. That's Bob Schultz in the business school.
Yeah.
I took a beautiful biology class from Dr. Bob Church, who's a great community leader, and it was just a fantastic course. And so many of my professors at the business school. So I always believe, and here's my advice for students: choose the professor, don't choose the course. See what the cool professor that you've heard about or you want to know more about is teaching, and just take that class. I once got a chance to take a class at Harvard from Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, who was well into his 80s then. And it was exactly what you think, John Houseman in the paper chase kind of Harvard.
Yeah.
Mr. Nenshi, is there too much money in politics? And then you'd say something and he'd be like, interesting. That's what Plato said. He was also wrong. Anyway, fabulous stuff. Okay, so that's that. Favorite place to hang out on campus and favorite place to study were probably the same. I found the secret was join clubs early that had offices. And then you would have a place to hang your coat.
And have a snack.
A place to leave your books and a place to study after hours. So I always would study in the volunteer center, which was in the basement of old McEwen Hall, where McEwen Hall is now, the big event space. And probably my favorite spot on campus at that time was old McEwen Hall, because some of the older 1960s buildings on campus that were built in sort of a brutalist fashion also had some kind of neat touches to them. So old McEwen Hall was sort of like what an Oxford building might look like if it was built of concrete in the 1960s. And it had really neat bits of wood and stuff. Most of that's gone now, which is too bad. But I always thought that was interesting, that even in an ugly building, you could see these senses of beauty. And yes, I was in the food court in McEwen Student Center all the time. I believe it was the Happy Plate special at the Oriental Walk kept me going through most of university. And
you were president of the Students' Union. What lessons did you carry forward from that as you entered public life?
You know what? I was 21 years old. And it's a full-time job. Maybe people don't know that. You just take one class. And typically, I took Dr. Glassberg's second class, never went. I was very busy, but I did the readings. But I found myself at the age of 21, brand new business degree, running an organization, which at the time was about $4 million budget, about 60 or 65 employees. So you were thrown into the water pretty quick. And I used that every day the fact that I became a professor of nonprofit management came from that formative experience running a large nonprofit. And so, and the fact that I ended up being a politician probably came from that too, eventually. And so there were amazing lessons learned, and it's something I highly recommend to everyone. In fact, I'm going to Color Night at the end of this month to welcome the new Students' Council. But I will tell you that I was president of the 51st Students' Legislative Council, and I believe we are swearing in the 80th.
And I was actually going to ask you if you were going to make it to Color Night, because I saw you tweet that you were hoping to go this year. So we'll definitely look forward. Knock on wood. It's at the end of April, right?
April 29th.
Yeah. April 29th. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been delightful. I know everybody's enjoyed your comments, and you gave us a lot to think about. Everything from building community, trying to reach across generationally the polarizing divides, and and you're optimistic for what lies ahead. And
there's nowhere in the world I'd rather be than here. And I'm deeply grateful that we have a university like this one and a chancellor like this one leading the way. We're very, very lucky.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And before I let everybody go, I just want to say, please think about joining me on the Chancellors Ride on the 30th of June to support our Chancellors Scholarships. It's going to take place in Banff. It's going to be hopefully it'll be a beautiful day. Since 1990, the fund has supported more than 300 students who have become leaders in our communities, and it would not be possible without the generous support of our donors and our sponsors. We didn't have the ride the last 2 years. We actually haven't been able to do anything significant in terms of fundraising because of COVID. So we're really looking forward to welcoming everybody if they can make it on the 30th of June for the Chancellor's Ride. It will actually be the last day as my Chancellor's term ends the same day as the ride. So think about joining us. Yeah, it's it'll be fully supported, so you can ride as much as you want or as little. It'll be like I said, in Banff, and hopefully the weather will cooperate. So register. I think the link will be provided in the chat, and it'll be really great to see as many people as we can get out there. One more thing too, UCalgary Giving Day returns this week on Thursday. It's a time to come together and demonstrate our collective power to continue making extraordinary things happen. And whether you support student awards, critical research, or any other of UCalgary's innovative funds like USeed, any member of the USeed family, this Giving Day, your gift will help change the lives and shape the future for many. All eligible gifts made between now and the 21st of April will be matched dollar for dollar, up to $2,500 per gift, but only while the matching funds last. So be sure to give early. Vote early, vote often, give early, give often. Make your gift today at ucalgary.ca/giving day. So thanks again for being with us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And if you'd like to view any portion of the program again, please watch for an email from us with a link to the full recording. And if you want to look at anything else that we've done over the last while, go to ucalgary.ca/community where you will find more webinars, podcasts, and stories on topics that matter to you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being an audience for the last 2 years. It's been great. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to do this. And I really enjoyed my time being able to connect with you, even though we can't do it in person. It's been another way to do that. So thanks very much. Enjoy the snow today, and we'll talk to you soon.